Okay, we got to get right into it. Got a short session for you today on articulations. Now, if you haven't heard of articulations, this is going to be a phenomenal session for you for many reasons. If we go into the user guide, you can see that we transitioned from the groove track, which if that was new, game changer in terms of aligning your audio and your MIDI to the actual groove rather to the quantization value. So today we're going to be working with articulations. What are articulations? Well, when you think about any instrument, there are a multiplicity of ways to actually be expressive with that instrument. So if we're talking a trumpet, there are different kinds of ways to play, and depending on the genre, those articulations or ways of expressing yourself will lend themselves well to that genre. For example, you can play staccato. It's a certain way to play the trumpet or strings or the harp, etc. And so today we're just going to look at studio strings and studio horns by Logic. There is a way to create articulation sets for third-party instruments, which I believe we're also going to briefly cover. So, with that being said, let me go ahead and zoom in a bit here. Sampled instruments that emulate real instruments often allow you to switch between the unique playing techniques that the real instrument is capable of. These playing techniques are called articulations. Of course, there are some articulations that translate well. For example, you could play staccato in various instruments, but sometimes there will be techniques that you cannot play with another instrument. So each articulation will be identified with a unique articulation ID. And the way we're going to trigger this is with your MIDI controller. For example, a sampled violin might offer articulations to switch between tremolo, pizzicato, a sustained note, while a sampled horn might include sustain, staccato, trills, can also apply for strings, and falls, can also apply for strings as well. Excuse me. Logic Pro offers various ways to choose which articulation to use for the notes that you play. So there are a couple different ways which we can choose the articulations. All the information regarding the available articulation is stored in the articulation sets, which we'll be looking into. These sets are saved within patches and projects. So if you create one, you take the necessary time, it'll pay off in dividends. For instruments to load with pre-configured articulation sets, you can choose an articulation from the plugin window header or a pop-up menu in the editors. I know that we can use smart controls, key command B, so we'll look into that. I'm curious about this articulation from the plugin window header. I'm assuming they actually are referring to the plugin that's right behind me here. There's a menu at the top, and you can change the articulation, but we'll see when we get there. When you record a performance, each note will be recorded with its respective articulation. One of two ways to do this. If you're really pro, you can change key switches, articulation ID, and then record it on the spot. Of course, you can just play it beforehand, and then after the fact, you can program in the articulation technique. For recorded or manually created notes, you can change the articulation. Okay? You can choose an articulation set in the track inspector. So either pre-made, or if you make it yourself, you can create, view, and change parameters for existing articulation sets. Pretty cool. What else we got? Manage articulations in the Logic Pro editors. If articulations have been recorded along with notes and events in a region, an articulation pop-up menu becomes available in the piano roll. So let's show you this. Very cool. All right, so check this out. If I have studio horns or studio strings, and let's say I create a MIDI region, let me get into the piano roll by hitting P. You can see that automatically there is an articulation menu here inside of the piano roll editor. So I can start to create notes in essence and change the articulation over time. So for example, this can be sustain, this one can be staccato, and this one, let's do a scoop, and maybe I'll make it a little bit long. Let's listen to this. Right? And so that's a lot more expressive. Had I not done any of that, oh, I don't know if let me see if I could do this. Shift Command Z redoes, Command A, and then let's go here. Let's go with all, just kind of just go all. Let's see what this sounds like. Right? It's not the same in terms of its expression. So the possibilities here truly have expanded extensively. Now you could have done this in the past, it just would have taken a lot more time. So in terms of having a sense of realism and really making this work and creating a sense of authenticity, it's all there. It's literally in your hands now. It's just a matter of understanding how to hack the system, okay? All right, let's keep going here. So we can manage this inside of the piano roll editor if there's an articulation set created for that specific software instrument. You can also select all the notes that use the same articulation and choose articulations via the shortcut menu. Okay, let's check that out. Command A. I'm going to control click. I would assume the MIDI notes, but let me try the piano roll itself as opposed to the MIDI notes. Does that make sense? Right, I'm clicking or control clicking away from the actual MIDI events. And then under articulation, we can change all the various articulations here. So this can be as easy as, you know, control clicking here, going to articulation, setting the proper articulation here. Pretty amazing. Let's keep it going. Choose an articulation in the piano roll editor. Okay, we went through that. If we look at the plugin itself, you can see that the articulation menu is here as well. Let's go ahead and play this back. And the last played articulation is being highlighted in this menu here. In fact, let me just open something up really quick. Right there. So let's play this again. Okay, good. Wait, I realize that you guys are good. Trying a new technique out. So yeah, here is the last played articulation. It says, if an articulation set is loaded, you can select between articulations in the plugin window header. So that's right here. You can change from here as well. So a couple different ways to do it. Let's test this out. Here's fall short. Okay, that went back to expressive medium. Let's try growl. That's pretty good. Here's trill. These are really nicely sampled in all fairness. Scoop. Add some reverb, some compression, and man, that'll sound really nice. Let me bring you guys in. Hold on one sec. All right, so again, articulation menu can be selected from here. You see your last played articulation from right here. Okay. And then we go from there. So then let's go back here. There is also a way to view and change these via a key switch menu. So again, if this has already been selected, if I hit B inside of Smart Controls, as soon as I bring this up, you can see key switches. All right. And then now, usually this is off by default. So if I try and hit the appropriate key switch, in this case it's C0, you're not going to see any changes. And that's because MIDI remote has to be on in order for you to pull this off. Okay, so right here. So then now you can see I'm hitting the various key switches. And so you can again, hack the system, do this within the piano roll, do this within the plugin, or you can now what's interesting is there are behaviors for how you trigger and re-trigger these, which we can go over. But either way, I just want you to understand where to find these. And the user guide was also referring to the track inspector right here. And if we go into Articulation Set, we can see that I am selecting Logic, Articulation Set from the Studio Horn series, Studio Alto Sax 1. So then now all of this is connected and everything is kind of talking to itself, okay? If I wanted to edit my articulation set, this is what we're going into next. All right, so we open up the key switch view, which is smart controls. If the articulations are spread over more than one of the octaves, let's move this up, we can change the offset here. So let's say I didn't want the key switch to happen at C0 or C sharp or what have you. I'm going to bring this up one octave, and now we're at C1 octave range. Let's bring that back down. Okay, there is a show hide key switches key command. All right, let's see if that is on by default or not. Let's just type in key switches. Okay, so if you wanted to open that up, if this is something that you use, I would highly recommend you set that up as a key command. We can, switch the articulations, and again, you can also just click the notes if you wanted to do it this way as well. Okay, so that is good there. Let's go back into that edit menu that disappeared. Okay, good. Let's look at this for a quick sec. Now we know this is kind of inherent, built into Studio Horn, Studio Strings, but this is also effective via third-party instruments. Companies like Sonoscore the Orchestra, they have provided articulations for Logic. You can see that I have those set up right here. You can also set these up yourself. So let's look into that. Let's say you have Spitfire or something like that. They don't offer articulation sets yet, in which case you would make them yourself. Let's get into it. The Articulation Set editor can be used to create a sophisticated key switch and controller switch definitions. Let me just do one thing, one sec. Yes, right here. All right, cool. All right. So what are we going to see? Well, we can switch definitions, define output transformations, which enables compatibility with third-party sample libraries. So, essentially you're creating a language for all of these programs to talk to themselves. Logic's going to speak to Contact, going to speak to Spitfire, right? You can also use the Articulation Set editor to create articulation sets for instruments that have assigned articulation IDs to sample groups, but do not have pre-configured articulations. Let's see what that means. For example, some sampler instruments come pre-configured, okay, good, but do not have pre-configured articulation sets, okay? So that means a sampler can trigger a conga, but not necessarily how that conga plays. And so we're going to hopefully get into that. All right, let's look at the articulation pane. This is where you define specific articulations, including their names. All right, menus in the okay, so let's go here, articulations. So you can change, in fact, let me go back to key switches down here. You can change the name of the category. I don't know why you would do that, but if you wanted to, you can change it here, and it would also show itself in the key switch menu. All right, looks like you can control the actual articulation here. So there's more if you needed some more ways of expressing the instrument: fermata up, double accent, tenuto, martellato, pizzicato. All right, so lots of stuff here. If you wanted to change that, maybe you want to create a more extensive menu, you can do that here, right? Okay, you can set articulations to be triggered by MIDI channel rather than an articulation ID. This can be useful for instruments whose MIDI channels are used to control additional properties. Okay, the articulation pane contains a table showing the following parameters: the name, the articulation ID field, type of number to be the articulation ID for your articulation. For sampler-based instruments that use the articulation ID for group selection, choose the corresponding articulation ID. For any other instruments, an output transformation needs to be defined on the output page, converting the articulations back into key switches. Okay, articulation ID field. So sometimes that kind of stuff sounds like Chinese to me, right? That just engineering, programming. Let's see if this gets a little easier. I mean, it's all working, so that's good. But what if you wanted to program some of this stuff in yourself? I suppose this is just literally its ID, its tag. But let's keep going and let's see if we can read more here. Symbol pop-up menu. So if you wanted, for notation purposes, to change the symbol, choose a MIDI channel for the articulation. Good. Revert button. Let's say you made some changes, you made some stuff up, you messed it up. You can revert back. Okay. Undo. I don't see the revert button here on the actual GUI. Plus and minus buttons, we do see that. We see undo. I wonder if that's what they mean by revert. Anyhow, let's keep going here. Top left, the switches pane. So let's go here. All right, again, this MIDI remote, these are tied together. This needs to be on and hit those key switches so you can select which note is going to actually trigger the articulation, right? And then how is it going to trigger? That's when we get into mode. So selector is the note itself. C0 is going to select sustain. D is going to select expressive medium. E0 expressive short, so on and so forth. When it does select sustain, for example, how is it going to do so? Right? We know it's going to select sustain because we can change the articulation on the right-hand side here. But what's the behavior? And this is where this comes in. So let's read a little bit on that. We know MIDI remote has to be active for your articulation switches to respond to the MIDI message, so that if I hit C0, it actually turns on. MIDI channel pop-up menu, so that's at the top there, sets a specific MIDI channel for all your key switches. If you have a dedicated keyboard or key switches, or you wish to limit your key switches to a particular MIDI channel. All right, I'll leave that for all my my engineers there. Good, highlight that. Let's keep it going here. Octave offset pop-up menu. We saw this already. If we want to change the range, we can do so here. These three switches control can be set locally in the switches pane or globally to affect how all instruments with articulations will behave. To determine the local or global settings, you want to go to articulation switches. Okay, well that's cool. Below the controls is a table showing articulations along with the following parameters. All right, so the type is, is it going to be a note on and off? Is this MIDI, note off, poly aftertouch controller program? How is this going to be triggered, in other words? Okay, let's go to the right, top right here. Selector pop-up menu. So that is to the right of that. Which value triggers the articulation? C0, C2. For example, if you choose note on, right, and you hit your keyboard, it's going to control it. If you choose controller in the type column, you would choose a specific controller number. If you choose program, aftertouch, or pitch bend in the type column, there will be no selector value. So look, I keep it really simple. All I do is on and off, and that's how I trigger stuff. There's more here though, clearly. Check this one out. Value start slider. When you do trigger, how aggressively do you need to trigger the MIDI? So for example, I'm on sustain right now. In order to hit or trigger or activate expressive medium, I'm going to change D0 to a value of, let's say, 90. So I'm hitting C0, and I'm going to very softly hit D, but we're not going to really see it trigger until I hit it with the highest value, anything above 190. The same goes for value end. So it almost creates a limitation in case you wanted to trigger various articulations with different dynamics. For example, I could trigger staccato by hitting a MIDI value between 0 and 30. Then if I wanted marcato, I can go between 30 and 60. Then if I wanted a trill, I can go between 60 and 90. So this is just depending on how aggressively you trigger the 0 to 127 value, you will then, in effect, get the appropriate response. So again, if this is kind of above and beyond your understanding, it really doesn't matter, because all of this is, there's always the kind of the easy way to do this, and then kind of the deep programming way. And thank goodness for these programmers. They do such an incredible job. I just want to applaud them really quickly. It's just amazing what they're able to pull off, and how they've given so many people the ability to create themselves and write the music of their dreams. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. Let's go over these mode pop-up menus, and then we'll call it a day. So they're called switch modes. These different switch modes exist in order to support both variations in your playing style and special articulation features. Now, I would say this is obviously for bona fide keyboard players, people that really can get their hands on the keyboard. If this is not you, you're going to be programming this, but still, it's worth just glancing over it. Let me just see what I have next. Okay, good. I'll be able to, yeah. Okay, so if you've seen my course on live loops, you understand that there's a behavior to the playback. In the same way, every single time I trigger one of these modes, it reacts a certain way. It's obvious that if I hit permanent, it's going to switch to the articulation, and then it's going to be used for all of the following notes. That's basic enough. In other words, if I'm using sustain and then I hit staccato, everything following my key switch will always be staccato. Now check this one out. Permanent retrigger stops the currently sounding note and re-triggers it immediately with the newly selected articulation. So if I'm hitting C, 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 but I want to change that from a sustain to a staccato, then I would use this switch mode. And you can see that every one of these is going to have its natural behavior. So I encourage you, if you're somebody that plays live, that you can really get your hands on the keyboard to take notes, get this down, okay? All right, let's keep going here. The output pane, what is this about? Let me go ahead and switch. Oh, geez, that menu is always going. Edit, output. Okay, let's look at this. For instruments that don't support the use of articulation IDs, third party, you can use output pane to define how articulations are accessed in your particular instrument. Output articulations are mostly key switches. Okay, some third-party sampler instruments also use controllers as switches. Working in the output pane, you can define output triggers for articulations, which means that you can use triggers with third-party libraries. Cool. The output pane consists of a table showing each articulation along with the following parameters. So you got a third party, you want to create an articulation set, this is where you're going to want to work, right? And create your own. So you're creating the name, the type, just as we went over. That's good. Okay, what is going to trigger it, right? And then the value. So for example, I'm going to say note on off, the selector is going to be D2, and then the value is, when is it going to trigger? If I hit it softly, if I hit it hard, or just always. If I go 0, it's going to just trigger every single time, no matter what. And then if I go higher, it requires a deeper response from my performance. And so that is it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed that. See, is there anything else here? value n, you can revert. It looks like undo is what they mean by revert. Okay, if you want to then activate your articulation set in the future, you would go to Articulation Set. You can save it, and then of course if you want to create a new one, you could do that here. Okay, so this is only applicable to anybody that wants to create an instrument with articulation sets for third party. Okay, so again, Spitfire, anything in that domain. I hope that most manufacturers and companies start to create these, as obviously they're necessary, right? If you want to create a new articulation, you press the plus button. Remove an articulation, you would hit the minus button, and then if you want to revert, click the revert button at the bottom left of the articulation set editor window. So just really quick, I'm going to create new. Go here. Okay, and this is where all that magic would happen. There's a couple little inconsistencies that I can see from the menu, but overall it is all there. All right, my good friends, I hope that worked for you. Just go through the details one day at a time. Next time we'll cover bouncing tracks in full detail, and then finally we'll get into selection-based processing and exporting. Next chapter will be recording your voice or a musical instrument. I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for your time. Stay up, stay happy, and I will see you on the next one. Cheers.